"Give me your hand," yelled a masculine voice. I reached up with my right hand, but the waves pushed me back down into the undersea reef. I fought to get out of the water and get some fresh air to breathe. I was terrified about becoming entangled in the reef and dying. I was on a surf trip with my partner in Rincon, Puerto Rico, in February 1978, and we were staying at Kana's guest house. I had been in Rincon for about a month when I went to a surf break named Maria's with a group of surfers at the end of our trip. My guy rushed into the lake and paddled out as soon as we arrived. He didn't want to miss out on surfing as many waves as he could cram into the day. Because I was new to surfing, I took my time. The terrain was rough, with a reef bottom and a jagged reef wall protruding from the ocean. The cliff's height above the ocean appeared to be 10 feet. The currents were really powerful. I estimated the waves to be 4 feet high that day. I wanted to see what the bottom looked like before going surfing, so I went snorkeling in the 4 feet waves. Unfortunately for me, the waves were significantly larger, about 6 feet in height. There was a northeast swell and a south breeze. The wave's wall and lip were both substantial. When I was hit by a wave, it seemed like a brick wall was collapsing on me and driving me down beneath the wave into the reef caverns at the ocean's bottom. Despite the fact that I thought the waves were irregular and tiny, I swam out with the intention of reaching the outside to join my partner and the other surfers. After swimming over what I believed was the third wave of a 4-wave set, I noticed that the waves were constantly coming and increasing bigger and heavier, indicating that there was no such thing as a 4-wave set. I was trapped amid a series of waves and was being forced deeper towards the rocky reef. The undertow made swimming difficult, and the powerful currents drew me towards the steep coral cliff. I was suddenly banged up against the reef cliff, attempting to climb it to avoid drowning. Sea urchins were all over the rock, their tentacles piercing my skin as I struggled to climb. I didn't feel the urchins, but I did hear their tentacles smash into me. My red crochet bikini was twisted and torn in places, exposing areas of my body for further ripping. I fall back down the cliff into the ocean. Another wave knocked me underwater. I'm going to perish. I was drowning. I couldn't breathe. I was choking on salt water as I was pulled deeper and deeper into the reef, into the caverns. I recall thinking that if I was caught behind the reef, I'd never get to the surface again. Another enormous wave knocked me onto the rocky cliff as I climbed back up. More sea urchin tentacles pushed their way into me. The needles pierced me severely as I slid back down the rough cliff, scratching me even more as I returned to the sea. The sensation appeared to be in slow motion. Once again, I reasoned that if I could simply scale that cliff, I may be able to save myself. When I emerged out of the water, coughing and desperately struggling to remain afloat, a wave forced me onto the cliff, and I began scrambling up the stony reef. More sea urchin tentacles fell in my hands, arms, breasts, thighs, and under my nails as I climbed. With a burst of adrenaline, I continued to climb higher and prayed, numb to the agony and hyper-aware of the sound of each tentacle breaking off into my body and the thunder of the water. Please, Lord, do not take me. I'm not worthy to travel right now. As I climbed, reef abrasions tore into my skin, pouring blood onto the rocks. The sea was yelling at me. It seemed to agree with me that she's not worthy, yet had decided to let her drown. I continued to climb for my life for what seemed like an eternity. Another wave erupted. I needed to rise higher or it would take me down and beneath. If I fall down again, I'm going to die. God, please don't take me. I pleaded again as I crawled up the cliff with every ounce of energy I could summon. I haven't done nearly enough in your honor. I was clinging on for dear life, pleading with God to give me more time on earth. I disconnected from my body at that point, and a foggy form of myself was yanked straight up and out of my body via my skull. The weight of my body was taken from me. My cloud-like being was then forced into an upright sitting position on the top of an old wooden seat. On my bottom, I floated, hovered, sat over the bench. I wasn't going to touch it. I was conscious of my drowning physical body below, striving to get away from the large wave that had reared up and was ready to strike me, washing me back down the cliff into the ocean. As I saw my material bodily self striving to survive, I noticed people gathering on the beach below me, and I heard a young guy cry, "There's a woman out there drowning, stuck on the coral. Let's go help her." As I watched my physical self struggle for existence, I noticed a crowd forming around the young man. A human chain was being formed to pull me out of the water. I hovered in a sat posture above an ancient wooden bench, fully aware of this setting and also having a heightened feeling of awareness of sound and warmth, and observed an unfolding scene that featured a review of my life. A lengthy stream of warm, blue, white lightning-like light flowed to my right. As I levitated over the bench, I understood instinctively that this force was in command. I recall thinking that this light had to be God. My cloud-like self was shivering with panic, a fear I'd never felt before. I was afraid that I would be judged and deemed unworthy of entering paradise. I was afraid that I hadn't lived my worldly existence to the utmost. I wasn't a saint, but I wasn't a horrible person either. I didn't know why I believed I wasn't worthy to be in the presence of the divine at the moment, but it turned out to be a learned adaptation from my childhood. There was a tunnel in front of me and to my left, and the light of God was to my right. Joe, my father as a child, was floating to the left of the entrance in a misty shape of blues and browns. Christ floated to the right of the tunnel, near to the entrance, in a misty shape of whites and pastel pinks and blues. When I glanced at Jesus, I felt protected and began to settle down a little. He exuded warmth and affection and telepathically assured me that everything was okay. My growing-up father appeared to be interacting with a dark entity within the tube. I knew this figure was a guy intuitively, and they seemed to know one another as if they were buddies. Joe was asked whether I was coming by a mysterious person. "We don't know yet," Joe said, looking across at Jesus. "Patience, we don't know yet," Jesus said. "We'll have to wait and see." Joe returned his gaze to the enigmatic figure to corroborate what Jesus had stated. My father was roughly the same height as the dark figure man. He was full of energy and had thick Elvis-style hair with a wave in it. He proceeded down the tube to notify the other creatures. The mass gathering of entities could be heard murmuring from the end of the tunnel. "Is she coming?" they asked in unison. The mysterious person then returned down the tube and asked my father Joe, "Is she coming?" I had an intuitive feeling that I recognized this man-creature, but didn't know where or why. At the end of the tunnel, thousands of entities converged in a black silhouetted collective shape, muttering, "Is she coming?" The people at the other end of the tunnel recognized me. It was then transmitted to me telepathically that these are my ancestors and friends who have come to meet me. To answer their query, the mysterious figure returned down the tunnel. I saw a panoramic assessment of my life in reverse projected onto a white screen to the right of the tunnel in front of me. My narrative was considered for a black and white 35mm film. It started with visualizing myself drowning and everyone banding together to help me. I witnessed snippets of my life and childhood from there. The projection moved so swiftly that it was impossible to focus and understand what I was seeing. "Please slow down the film," I recall thinking. The film then shifted to a dismal tint, and I watched my birth and before my birth. The film slowed down, allowing me to take in what was being shown to me more clearly. I saw myself pleading with my parents to be born so that I might learn the lessons of endurance and tenacity. During the vision, I heard a spiritual person tell me telepathically, "It's time for you to be born." I had to go, but I didn't want to stop riding my white horse to give birth. I saw myself as a young child, between the ages of 10 and 12, flying through the skies. In the life review, I was a flowing cloud of colors riding on a white horse, comparable to Christ's and my father Joe's cloud formations in colors. I was aware that this projected self on the screen had previously resided on the opposite side of the black tunnel. On the horse, I saw a really long, wavy, off-white lighted cloud-like mane. I reflected on how lovely the horse's mane was and how majestic I appeared on the big steed. "Wait, is it really me on that horse?" I pondered. I then heard the film flapping loudly behind me as it completed on the reel and flapped around and around, signaling the end of the reel. In retrospect, I wonder whether the flapping was the sound of the waves bringing me down to earth. This viewing began at warp speed, and by the conclusion, it was easier to focus on what I was watching. I was quite conscious of many events occurring while watching the film. The shadowy figure was in the tunnel, and at the end was the collective consciousness of the entities waiting for me, whispering in a tone-like chant, "Is she coming?" My father, Joe, was waiting near the tunnel entrance on my left as I hovered over the ancient wooden bench. Jesus Christ stood to the right of the tunnel entrance. He was a 30-year-old man hovering approximately 2 feet off a cloud. The light, God, was next to me, at my right, and within touching reach. My life evaluation was being screened. Finally, I could see myself sinking and others rushing to help me. I was aware that everything was happening at the same moment. I recall an overpowering sense of love and acceptance that I had never experienced before. I was terrified, but not as terrified as when I initially came. As I tell this experience to you, everything happened extremely rapidly. I remembered feeling this instinctive connectedness to everything and thought that maybe it wouldn't be that horrible if I went down the tunnel. Then I became aware of God telepathically informing me, loudly and plainly, that I was to return and teach others about the existence of God. Go and prove to everyone what you have seen and experienced, the Spirit said again. The next thing I remember is being hurled back into my body at light speed via my mind, with God telepathically informing me, time is of the essence, time is limited, as you know. Go teach something. I am that which I am. With a shock, I arrived back inside my body. The reef abrasions on my body, the sea urchin needles beneath my fingernails, and the rocky cliff slicing open fresh wounds on my body were the next sensations I felt. Give me your hand, the young man urged as I struggled for air and prepared myself for another wave that would force me to the reef bottom. He stood perilously leaning down on a steep ledge, one arm and hand extended to me, offering assistance. He was being held and supported by a chain of 5 or 6 persons. All of them were young males and 2 women. This was the group I saw forming during my out-of-body experience. I extended my hand to the young man, who drew me up and handed me down the human chain, all the way to the beautiful sandy shore. I recall thinking that these folks were putting their lives at danger to save mine. I recall feeling this pure love and compassion for these folks, standing on the jagged reef cliff, risking their life for mine. They're getting sliced up for me, I recall thinking. I recall a young woman providing me her white blanket once I was safely on the beach. I told her I couldn't handle it because I was afraid of becoming bleeding. It doesn't matter, she said, you need it more than I do. She assisted me in repositioning my red crochet bikini over my breasts and bottom. In my swimming suit, I was nude, bloodied, and twisted up. My lover approached me while I lay down on the beach. I was saying something to him in hushed tones. Don't ever tell anyone that, he said. They'll commit you to a mental hospital. I collapsed and was transported to the hospital. For years, my boyfriend's statements kind of froze my willpower. As I went through a few terrible situations in my professional and personal life, I began to think what others felt about me at the time, that I was unworthy and that what I had to say was invalid. That conviction just bolstered my ex-warning. Boyfriend's my NDE, on the other hand, was genuine, and I couldn't stop thinking about it every day. When I was 65 years old, I discovered via DNA testing that my growing-up father, Joe, was not my biological father. And, prior to my mother's death, she verified this. My blinders have fallen off as a result of this revelation, and my entire existence has been altered and awakened into a more confident and self-assured human being. Knowing I was gaslighted my whole childhood gives healing and an explanation of why I wore blinders for the majority of my adult life and felt worthless. As a youngster and adolescent, I was aware of a family secret, and this shadow was really close to my parents. My mother stated before she died that I reminded her of my biological father since I looked so much like him. It was difficult for them to wake up every day to me. The likeness to my biological father grew stronger as I grew older. It was a difficult pact they made to never tell people that I was not Joe's child. I grew up with their family's tragedy, anguish, and emotional abandonment etched on my spirit, which is now joyfully healed. My half-siblings, 2 sisters, handed me an 8x10 photo of our biological father, Raymond, when I first met them. My NDE raced over my memory, and I immediately recognized the dark guy as Raymond, my biological father. That's him, exclaimed a booming voice telepathically. It wasn't the first time I heard the voice confirm or tell me anything. But now, with more certainty, I understood that the booming voice was as real as I was. Since this event, I've been thinking about how to effectively relay the message that I am who I am and that God exists. I occasionally see an image flash through my head or get a physical sensation that I recognize someone from a prior life experience we had. This feeling was amplified when I met my ex-husband, the father of my children, in the early 1980s. I now think that once we leave our physical body, we move to a collective awareness where we are received with unconditional love and someone we know who has passed. Even if we don't recognize them, we have a relationship with them, such as Eben Alexander's sister and my real father. I know that I am always loved by God, Christ, no matter how much I think I am not worthy. Every day, I have a constant conversation with Christ, God, about how to best serve all sentient beings.